First of all, I'd like to extend my gratitude to my colleague from Maryland for allowing me to speak at this time. I appreciate that. Madam President, I rise in support of the amendment introduced by my good friend, the gentleman from Texas, that would defund the implementation of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act for the remainder of this fiscal year. Madam President, almost everything the American people were told about Obamacare by the bill's proponents has turned out to be incorrect. We were promised that it would save money. Now we know that it will cost us more money. In just 2 short years, the projected 10-year cost of the federal government's health care takeover has ballooned from $940 billion to $1.76 trillion. We were promised that it would help a struggling economy. Now we know that it will help smother a still struggling economy. According to the Federal Reserve, employers cite Obamacare as a principal reason for planned layoffs and reluctance to hire new employees. According to the National Federation of Independent Business, Obamacare's unconstitutional mandate, which the Supreme Court salvaged only by rewriting it as a tax, will kill between 125,000 and 249,000 jobs over the next 10 years. According to the Congressional Budget Office, Obamacare will reduce total American employment by 800,000 jobs by 2021. In fairness, Madam President, these are only projections, although I believe even those projections are optimistic. They certainly contradict the fairy tale arguments in favor of Obamacare in 2009 and in 2010, but they are still just best guesses. The reason Senator Cruz and I introduced, and the reason why I support this amendment, is that the case against Obamacare is rapidly moving from fears about tomorrow to pain that's felt today, right now. In 2008, then Senator Obama promised that his policies would lower health care premiums for the average American family by $2,500. 4 years later, and 2 years after President Obama signed Obamacare into law, the Kaiser Foundation reports that family health insurance premiums have actually risen by $2,370. This is one of the things we were told, that we needed to pass the bill in order to find within the bill a $5,000 premium hike on working families. So what else have we found? We found that when the federal government requires businesses to provide health insurance for their full-time employees, businesses respond by cutting employee hours. Other companies have chosen to go further and have simply laid employees off altogether or shipped those jobs overseas. Other companies have admitted that the costs Obamacare adds to their business will have to be passed on to their customers in the form of higher prices. Then there's the devastating impact Obamacare has had on our medical device industry, which is targeted for a special punitive tax under this law. Companies from Boston Scientific, Stryker, Smith & Nephew, and others are laying off workers and shipping their jobs overseas. It's important to remember, Madam President, that each of these layoffs is, in a sense, a double strike against our economy. On the one hand, when people lose their jobs and their health insurance, and the economy suffers in and of itself just because of that impact. But on the other hand, at the very same time this is occurring, because Obamacare and the rest of the president's failed agenda are weighing down our economy quite heavily, there aren't enough new jobs being created for the recently unemployed Americans to fill. So the unemployed are not only staying unemployed for longer than normal, but they're also increasing demand for already overburdened government assistance programs. Thanks to Obamacare, fewer people are working and paying into the system to support people Obamacare is preventing from finding work and health insurance in the first place. Madam President, the beauty of the Cruz Amendment is that we don't have to pass it to discover what it would do. We already know exactly what it would do. It would delay the implementation of Obamacare and thereby save taxpayer money and American jobs. It would also restore a semblance of democratic accountability to a process that is in badly need of precisely that. After all, the various departments of the federal government have already issued some 20,000 pages worth of regulations to formalize the Obamacare system. In other words, the 2,700-page monstrosity Congress passed in 2010 was only a fraction of the final deforesting product. Does anyone, literally anyone in the entire country, really know what those 20,000 pages of regulations might say? For all we know, Madam President, we could be violating Obamacare right now. Somewhere in those 20,000 pages, there might be something saying we can't do what we're doing at the moment. But you might think I'm exaggerating, Madam President, but as we were all shocked to learn recently, 98% of individual health insurance policies in the United States right now are in violation of Obamacare's standards. When Obamacare goes into full effect, those Americans who own those policies will have to either buy more expensive insurance than they have now or pay the unconstitutional fine. The unconstitutional fine that was, according to the Supreme Court, unconstitutional as a fine and could be sustained by the Supreme Court only because the Supreme Court rewrote the law as a tax instead of a fine. To recap then, Obamacare is already costing us jobs that we need badly. It's raising health care costs, it's adding to our deficit, it's adding to our debt, it's forcing families off of health insurance policies they have and they like. It's doubling as a Trojan horse for 20,000 pages of new law that no elected official wrote and not a single citizen in the United States has read. And then, of course, there's the slow-motion train wreck of the law's implementation. A majority of states in the Union have already refused to set up their own Obamacare exchanges. The bill has been passed, you see, Madam President, and the American people now see what's in it, and they want no part of it. And so the Department of Health and Human Services is now charged with setting up federal exchanges in those states. But they don't know how. The clock is ticking. People are losing their health insurance. The exchanges are supposed to be ready to handle the massive influx of people dumped by Obamacare onto those same exchanges, and the exchanges aren't going to be there. What will be there? Well, according to a report issued by the Associated Press, uninsured Americans will find a 15-page, 21-step application that will need approval from 3 separate federal agencies. There are expected to be more than 4 million of these applications next year alone. And even as an advocate of the program says in this same AP story, the form will take a considerable amount of time to fill out and will be difficult for many people to be able to complete. And that part of the process, quote, does not get you to the selection of a plan, close quote. Madam President, Obamacare is going to make doing your taxes feel like a round of golf. For this reason, there are some who believe the only way to expose Obamacare and rescue the health care system is to let nature take its course, to let it go into effect as soon as possible. They say the sooner it collapses, the sooner we can repeal it and start over. The gentleman from Texas and I, and everyone else supporting this amendment, rejects that logic. We cannot, in good conscience, send millions of innocent Americans into a dangerously dysfunctional health care system run by unaccountable, if well-intentioned, bureaucrats. We will not sacrifice millions of families to prove a political point. People's lives and livelihoods are at stake. The American people are not pawns in Washington's partisan political game. We work for them, not the other way around. As public servants, we have an obligation to protect the American people, those who elected us to serve. Obamacare is going to hurt our country, our economy, our constituents, our friends, and our neighbors. It is the single greatest threat to our economy and to our health care system. Eventually, Madam President, Obamacare will be repealed. The American people will see the damage it does and demand that we scrap it and start over. But for now, we must at least defund it, at least for the life of this continuing resolution, for the remainder of this fiscal year. Senator Cruz and I have been assured this amendment will fail and that Obamacare will move ahead as planned. If that is the will of the Senate, then so be it. But when Obamacare does start to break down, when waiting times start to grow, when costs start to explode, when taxes start to rise, when doctors and nurses start to quit, when hospitals start to close, when businesses start to shutter, when take-home pay falls and jobs disappear, when patients and families truly find out what's in this bill, then the American people will know who is responsible for the catastrophe of Obamacare and who, like the gentleman from Texas, tried to help. Madam President, a few years ago, when then Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, famously told members of the House that you have to pass this 2,700-page bill in order to find out what's in it, she perhaps saw what we would be experiencing today, or at least some aspect of it. But either way, we today now see what's in what they passed back then. We, as members of the Senate, have had an opportunity to review this piece of legislation over the last few years. We know what economic impacts this law is already having, as its still nascent implementation has moved forward. We need to make ourselves accountable to the American people for what's in this law and what we now know is in this law. I therefore respectfully urge each and every one of my colleagues to support this amendment. Thank you, Madam President. I yield back my time.